this up and go live and talk a little bit about this. And as I mentioned earlier in an earlier broadcast, I wanted to mention that, I want to change the way we look at history. I want to look at things in history from a different perspective. I don't want to just have situations where we are simply just looking at history from one perspective and not another perspective, not really taking a deeper look. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Merneptah today as I come to you at a slightly different time. I wanted to dive into his history, into his kingship. And I thank you so much for those who are watching and supporting. He was the son of Ramses II. So he was one of the sons of Ramses II. He was like the 14th son of Ramses II. He had a lot of kids, Ramses II. And he was someone who lived obviously in the New Kingdom during the 19th dynasty. And so as he is ruling Kemet after his father, his famous father who ruled for a very long time in ancient Kemet, he is taking all the realms initially at a time where there's some peace here. I want to dig into his famous Stela, the Stela that he made that talked about how he defended Kemet against an attack that was taking place from the Libyan people. I wanted to dig into that and look at it from a different way, because a lot of times we really just don't look at the literature of ancient Kemet and all the information that it gives us. I don't think we would have the same kind of perspective about history if we dig into the actual things people said and looked at the actual historic record instead of just kind of what people tell us about it. So we're going to jump into that today. So as I mentioned, he's the son of Ramses II. So he lives in the 19th dynasty in ancient Kemet during the New Kingdom. And Ramses II, as you know, was a very famous ruler, one of the more famous rulers of ancient Kemet. He was somebody who reigned for a long period of time, and he had his famous Battle of Kadesh, which we talked about, when he had a very important and significant, I feel, stela and documentation of his fight and his battle in what we would call Middle East in today's Syria and in that area, and how he fought apparently by himself, supposedly by himself, against a lot of people and were able to defeat them, and how he was able to come back and honor God and give God praise for his victory there. So Ramses II talks about that, and he also, after that whole battle was over and interactions eventually with Hittite people, he was able to come up with a peace treaty was actually signed. So he had one of the world's first peace treaties signed under his father, Ramses II, with respect to things that were going on with the Hittites and the Kemetic people in the New Kingdom in the 19th dynasty. Well, all that's taking place, and Ramses II's account of his battle at Kadesh is a historic document. It's a beautifully written document. It's poetic. It has prose in it. It gives you information and perspective that's not always talked about in history. It gives you a deep feeling of what the king was thinking and how he responded to it, how he talked to God through it, what he said to his commanders. It's a very, very well told piece of literature, if you will. Well, Merneptah comes around and does a similar type of thing during his reign when Kemet is attacked by the Tajemna, or people who would be Libyan to the northwest of ancient Kemet. When they're attacked by the Tajemna, he does a similar thing. And so I kind of go through and talk about a little bit about this document and kind of read through it a little bit so as we talk through it, because during the 5th year of his reign, he is in a situation where there was a relative peace for a period of time. Once there was a peace treaty signed with his dad and the Hittites, there was relative peace, but then an attack takes place. An attack takes place in the northern part of ancient Kemet while he is king during the 5th year of his reign. And he is there and he is having to defend his people. What happens is the people that we would call, like in Libya, the Tajemna, as well as like Sea people, Indo-European people, they made a coalition. And they ended up attacking Kemet from the north. And at that period of time, places like Memphis and Anu, which are very important cities in the northern part of ancient Kemet, and Memphis was Hecataba and Anu was later called Heliopolis. Those are the areas, they were afraid. They were being attacked. And apparently, as the Stela goes, they were barricaded in some parts of the city. They were afraid to come out. They were being attacked. Memphis was a walled city. People had to go hide. They were being in a situation where they were under attack, and the people were trying to take over all of Kemet, and they were starting with the northern part. So Merneptah comes and responds, and he's like the tip of the spear. And a couple things he does, and I want to point this out, and in the first part of the Stela talks about him as being the Heru, or Horus, the Heru, the mighty bull, that he's a mighty bull rejoicing in truth and rejoicing in Ma'at. Several times in his Stela, he refers to himself as a bull. And I want to mention that because we were talking just a little while ago on the previous live broadcast about the idea of cattle and the bull and the whole idea of the Nile Valley as a culture, right? The Nile Valley as being not just, separated, and not even just being hugging the Nile. We think about the Nile Valley and we think about the civilizations of ancient Kush and ancient Kemet as being really civilizations that were tight against the Nile because of the desert, right? That they were tight against the Nile. And from a Kemetic standpoint, from the first cataract all the way out to the Mediterranean Sea, they had pretty smooth sailing, right? Literally pretty smooth sailing. No more cataracts where they can literally take over that tight part of the Nile. But you don't really have bulls and cattle in abundance in a desert, right? And I've always thought about it and asked myself the question, why is that the case? And part of that, and we'll talk about that again more, part of that obviously is that it wasn't always a desert and it wasn't always just Kemet. This was a larger area during a period of time at part of the Holocene period, which we are still in geologically speaking, where there was a more wetlands, more grass growing in what is today the Sahara Desert. And people could raise cattle in larger areas, not just around the Nile, not just hugging the Nile. They had wider areas. And we'll talk about that with respect to the kingdom of Cusco, and we founded Cusco in various places like Merneptah, and why and how they venerated bulls and they venerated cattle, because having a cattle in a semi-dry climate could be very useful to you. And those cattle, the cattle needed to eat, and so grassland was abundant at a period of time during the Sahara prior to the formation of ancient Kemet, where cows would have been very significant to the entire culture of the Nile Valley, not just Kemet, the entire culture, and before Kemet became a country. And you find then, even though when the Sahara Desert kind of takes over and the desert grows, it's the largest desert, and one of the hottest and driest places on earth, is one of the largest deserts on the earth. When the Sahara grows, then you have a situation where people do have to congregate around the Nile. They do have to look at the wonderful life-giving soot and soil that's coming from the highlands of Ethiopia and being brought down through when the Nile floods out to the Mediterranean. People do have to be significant with that. But that's later on. That's like during his time and during the Old Kingdom time in 3800 BC and 3100 BC. But prior to that, you had a period of time where there was grassland for a significant period of time, and cows and cattle become very significant. And so you find Kemetic pharaohs talking about themselves as if they were mighty bulls, even though they were living in a desert, right? As if they were mighty bulls. And that whole idea, because we'll talk about that more, is a cultural thing, and it's not just Kemet. The cows were venerated with the Medjay, with the Kushite people, with Nubian people who up and down Middle Kemet, all the way down to the Sixth Cataract. You have cows venerated in that entire part. So it's one of the aspects of the cultural continuity, if you will, of ancient Kemet and that whole Nile Valley. And it's not just the Nile itself, it's spread out beyond that. And it talks more about the connections they have than just the arguments or the pieces of a sandal that somebody wants to show you in terms of there being fights between Nubia and ancient Kemet. There was a shared culture there. And one of the examples of that is cattle, right? And how it's venerated and used throughout up and down ancient Kemet and Kush, and how people refer to themselves. So even though we're living in a desert, Merneptah is referring to himself as a mighty bull. The same way Pianki does later on, who is a Kushite king, later refers to himself as a mighty bull, and his mother being a cow who gave birth to a bull. That being something that was very respected. So he is a mighty bull. And getting back to Merneptah, he's a mighty bull. And during the 5th year of his reign, the people who are Tajemna, who would be in today's what we would call Libya, the Jemna come in a coalition, and they attack the northern part of ancient Kemet. And he has to respond. So he, as a mighty bull, responds. And as his response to that, he goes and he begins to attack the Libyan people and to free up the areas in Memphis and in the northern part of ancient Kemet that were being attacked by the Libyan people. People were apparently hiding in their houses and hiding in various places, and the temples were closed because they were being attacked. And when Merneptah came with his army that included Nubian soldiers, when he came with his army, he freed the people. He was able to make the Jemna scatter, the Libyan people scatter. The armies apparently gave up their weapons, and they threw down even their water skins and their supplies that they had to help feed them and nourish them. They threw them down, and the ruler, the great one, if you will, that was leading the army, apparently fled without his shoes. He fled with nothing, and his officers began to fight amongst themselves because he had left and things were in complete disarray. He talks about fear being in the heart of the army, and that when the ruler of the Tajemna went back to his land, into Libya, in today's Libya, went back to his land in Libya, that the people did not want to accept him, that the ruler was shunned by his people. And they said, you are under the thumb of Merneptah, the god of Egypt, the Lord of Egypt basically has you under his thumb, and you are no longer a ruler. So he talks about dispersing them and being able to drive them all the way out of ancient Kemet. And this Stela is beautifully written. He talks many things about, how he was able to destroy them, how they were able to go through a period of time where the people were then set free, and the people came out of their hiding places and were happy, and that they were smiling, and that things were wonderful with them again. And he also talks about a couple things to respect that he mentions later on in his Stela, how the people who were in his army, and I want to kind of show that to you so we can get an idea of what he's actually talking about here. How the people in his army, he mentions the Medjay here. And the Medjay, as I mentioned to you, the Medjay were people, and you can see it right there, the Medjay were people who were Nubians. These were Nubian people. These were people who lived south of the first cataract, probably more toward the east, if you will, going toward the Red Sea, toward the east. They were southern part of what is today ancient Kemet, and that southern area. They were Nubian people. Nubian soldiers fought throughout the entire history, all the major periods of Kemetic history. In the Old Kingdom, the New Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, Nubian soldiers were there. And he mentions them again in his Stela, this famous Stela. He's mentioning that he did such a great job in leading the army and fighting the Tajimna and the Libyans and kicking them out of ancient Kemet, that the Medjay are now asleep, that the Medjay don't even have to worry, they can relax, that the Nau and the Tekton are relaxing in the fields, that the cattle are grazing again, right? Cattle are grazing. People are not afraid. People are happy again. And so this idea and this reference to the Medjay and this reference to his soldiers being able to relax tells you a different story. It doesn't tell you the same story that people like to tell you, that there was just hateful relationship and that Nubia was just some, under the foot of ancient Kemet. That's not what's happening. You find time and time again them referring to Nubian people as being a part of their army. So imagine how important is an army? Even looking at the things that are going on, the crazy things that are going on today in the world, how important is having an army? How important is it to be able to defend yourself? You would not be a king. You would not be able to have your kingdom for very long, or your temples for very long, or have people pay taxes to you for very long if you didn't have an army. If you didn't have an army to defend you, to protect your temple, to collect your tribute, to defend you from attack, to be able to go out and extend your empire if you needed to extend your empire from threats that were beyond your borders. An army is significant. And what you do with an army is you take care of them. So these Nubian people who were part of their army were not like just shoved aside. Like, how many people can fight a war if your soldiers, the people who are going to battle with you hand to hand, are not treated well, are not respected by you, are not paid? You're not going to have a very good army. And so you're not going to be in existence for very long. You won't be lasting for 3,000 thousands of years. And so that idea of the soldier being respected, and the Medjay and the Nubian soldiers being respected and being a part of our army, is something we just don't even talk about. It's in the Kemetic literature. We just overlook it. So I kind of wanted to bring that out and to talk about that a little bit, because that kind of jumps out at me as I think about that. And hey, how you doing, Team Z? I appreciate it. Coming to you at a different time. God bless you. I hope that you are doing well. So how you doing? Just shout out to you. Want to say thank you. It's an important thing to think about. So it becomes important. So as you start to think about this and you start to think about documentation you want to look at that points out that relationship between Nubia and ancient Kemet, this is one of them you point to. But there's another thing about the Stela, his victory Stela that was in his temple that we talk about that jumps out, is not only does he mention the Medjay and his army being asleep now, he talks about, okay, so I defeated all of them. And then he goes and talks about the 9 bows, which are in a Kemetic sense, the area that they control, or that they may have control over or influence over. That's kind of like the realms that could rise up against them. So you talk maybe in Syria, down in Kush, various places around there that would be part of the 9 bows, a bow being obviously a weapon of war and that you can fight with. And so he talks about the chiefs and the great ones of the 9 bows bowing down to them. And this becomes the first time in Kemetic history, and apparently the only time, that the word Israel is mentioned. So you'll put it right there. He talks about, after he defeated the Libyans and the people of the Tajimna, he talks about the people of the 9 bows and being able to have Canaan as a captive, being able to have he already looked at the Tajimnu and he defeated them, and the Kati and the Kor. And he talks about Israel was laid to waste. And he mentions that, and this, as I mentioned, is apparently the only time, the first time and the only time the word Israel is mentioned in Kemetic literature. And so it becomes an historic document for that reason. And that becomes a famous reason why Merneptah is known for. People will try to associate him with the Exodus or something like that because of this document here and what he mentions. And as I said, it is maybe the first time in history that the word Israel was written down, just because of when he lives and when he was alive. So it becomes a literature for that reason. You can start to look at Kemetic literature and really be able to see and validate certain things. You can validate names, validate certain occurrences, because they documented so many things about that entire area and the area over which they had influence, that we can put 2 and 2 together and look at other documents and be able to corroborate what was said based on some of the historical historic documents that are there in Merneptah. So I just wanted to share that with you because a lot of people will know him for the Stela, and the Stela will be called the Israel Stela. That's what it's called, like by a lot of people, just commonly and historians, but it really is a stele that is much bigger than that. It doesn't just talk about Israel. It talks about his entire fight. It's mainly looked at in terms of his fight against the Libyan people, the people who were northwest, who attacked ancient Kemet, and what he had to do to defend them. And it isn't until the very end that the Israel word is mentioned and Israel country is mentioned at the very end of it. So I just wanted to share this with you. If you have any questions or comments, please put this down below. Let me know what more you want to hear about, and let me know what you're talking about and how you may share this with people and let other people know about it. So I very much appreciate it. God bless you. I want to thank you. Thank you for listening. And thank you for sharing up, Team Z. I very much appreciate it. So share this with somebody. Let's talk about this more. I'm going to try to come back to you as much as I can with more information about this ancient Kemet and ancient Kush. And I want to thank you so much for listening. And please share this with somebody. Talk to you soon.